Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Mosaic Podcast. I am privileged today to have a dear friend of mine and an inspiration to me, someone who has really inspired me over the course of years. His name is Kris Kaplan. And let me just give you a little rundown of who he is. Amongst all the achievements that I'm going to talk to you about, what Kris considers to be his foremost achievement is being a good husband, a great dad, and someone who is passionate about his health and his well-being. This guy, you wouldn't know it from looking at him. Yes, you would. I'm teasing him. He's an 8-time Ironman finisher, participant. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's been involved with the Gathering of Titans as a member. He's a speaker, a facilitator, and author. He has over 30 years of business experience and a passion for personal development and growth. Plus, he has a dedication to make awesome happen in life, which is unbelievable. I love that about him. With the help of his scaling up methodology, he grew his company to over 8 figures, and he sold it in a very healthy exit. But that's not the guy I want to talk about right now. The guy I want to talk about is the guy that 30 years ago was sitting in a prison cell and had no idea where his future was going to go. Because what's important for me and for the listeners of this podcast to know is that nothing is as it seems. Where we are in this moment is not where we are in life. It's just where we are in this moment. So without further ado, I'm going to get quiet and I'm going to introduce to you my friend, my buddy, Kris Kaplan. Welcome to the Mosaic Podcast, Kris.
Danny, it's awesome to be here. I doubt for very long you're going to be all that quiet, but I appreciate you saying that to everyone.
You know me too well. So before we get into the whole story of things,
sure.
What I want to ask is, when you were growing up as a kid, what did you dream of being?
Well, first, I have not grown up, nor do I ever intend to. I'm still a kid, 12 years old at heart. I wanted to be Joie Chitwood.
Okay, I don't know who Joie Chitwood is, so tell me who Joie Chitwood is.
Joie Chitwood, when I was a young kid, my favorite time in life was really my summers at my grandmother's house. And there was the Chautauqua County Fair. And amongst other things, other than a demolition derby, was the Joie Chitwood Thrill Show. And he was a guy with his brothers who used to ride motorcycles and drive cars over ramps and up on 2 wheels. And I wanted to be Joe. I was on my BMX bike. I wanted to be Joie Chitwood.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
And so where is Joie Chitwood today?
Yeah. Funnily enough, when I was running Kris & Company, we represented a line of soaps. And Joie Chitwood was the owner of this particular soap company. And I'm like, that's an interesting last name you have there, Jolie. And it was her uncle. So,
oh, my God. How cool is that?
That's I don't know how 40 years later, this connection, 30 years later, that connection was made. And short-lived experience with that line in our package. But, you know, I got a little closer to it, and I don't know, I've embraced the giddy up and go, just go for it, the sure, stick the landing, fail forward, all of the things that Joey did during his thrill show. And yeah, there you go. That's my only ever other person in the world I ever wanted to be other than myself.
So I love your perspective, first of all, in life, because most people, when I ask that question, will say, well, I want to be a doctor, or I wanted to be a pilot, or I wanted to jump out of a plane and do this. You actually wanted to be
fucking fair.
You wanted to work at the fair. And interesting enough, when I was asked as a kid what I wanted to be, I didn't think that I couldn't be a table or a chair or the sun or a tree. I really thought about everything in the world that I could possibly be. And I decided that I wanted to be a table rather than a chair because I didn't want people sitting on me all the time, but it's just so interesting the way we grow up and how that affects. So how would you say the fact of wanting to be Joie Chitwood Chitwood affected the way you grew up in life?
That's a good question. It was a life of adventure and a life of just going for it, of seeing whatever jump or whatever stunt or whatever was in front of you and like just press and go, gunning it and going right at it, right? I think that giddy up mentality that I've had for a really long time, there was probably something that went through Joey's mind when he was going right before he stepped on the gas pedal. And I don't know, for all I know, it was giddy up.
Yeah. And it also seems like there's a dangerous element that was exciting you, right?
A little bit. Yeah.
And so
I'm like, if there's no possibility of getting hurt, why bother?
Yeah. So if you now take that microscope of that perspective of life and you take it back to, 30 years ago, you were sitting in a prison cell. But how many years before that did you start to talk to me about the years before that that led up to that? Because maybe that Joie Chitwood attitude of living dangerously and living on the edge, wanting life to be something, now it puts in perspective a little bit. Does that make any sense to you?
A little bit. I think I fully embraced it early on. 8 years old till 12 years old was when that was probably the biggest influence in the summertime of what a fun job could really be. Yeah. And I think that started to change 12, 13, 14.
And what did you want to be in those days? When you were 12, 13, 14, what did you see yourself doing?
Loved.
Wow.
I don't think I wanted to be anything other they were tough times. I think between my 12th and 13th summers coming home from that very same place was when family separated and truly went their separate ways. And it wasn't a family of mine. It was an adopted family, but married into family that went one direction, and my mom and I went the other direction. And all of a sudden, like this big family was gone. So I struggled. Like it went into years of struggle.
Yeah.
Instantly.
Wow. So the amazing thing for me about what you're saying, which I just want to underline, and you tell me if it's right or wrong, is that moments in time can completely alter the life that we live.
A little bit. I remember the day coming home, I think just after Mother's Day, coming home from Fredonia, New York, driving in the back of the BMW 2002 series, hand out the window, going like this because it was still nice outside. And what I framed for a long time was the worst day of my life, which was when Bruce and Janine shared that they were separating, and it was going to be my mom and I, and Bruce and his 3 kids from a prior marriage, his brothers and sisters who were I'm known as my aunts and uncles and everything. They didn't say this at the time, but it seemed like they all disappeared.
Wow.
And it was framed as the worst day of my life for a really, really long time. I think it was Tony Robbins who helped me reframe it one day. And upon meeting him and shaking his hand, asked me to go back a second in time. Just go back 1 second in time. And, my hand was outside the window going like that. He's like, there. Like reframe that day around that moment. And I've been able to do that. I've been able to move on. It took a long time, and just recently had a realization that I didn't lose my family. And I thought for 30 years that I lost my family. Wow. Come to find out, well, they weren't my family to begin with. I wasn't born into it. We weren't married into it. We were just living alongside them for 12 years. And the cool thing is this single kid of only child of a single mom actually got to see what living in a big family was like. So it's been a complete reframe these days of I didn't lose my family. I thought I did for a really long time, but now I've rewritten the story without changing anything and said, this single child, of a single, only child of a single mom got to experience what life was like in a big family. And now I look back at those years were like a blessing.
Yeah.
I mean, the day still sucked, but the years were a blessing. And it wasn't what it seemed like, just to your theme.
So, and I love that. And thank you for highlighting that theme, because it isn't just moments in time that aren't what they seem like. It's lots of moments in time. And so for those of you listening, you can already feel it. If you're sensitive and you're not only listening to the words Kris is saying, but the energy in which he's saying it, you can feel his zest for life and his desire to see things positive and make things good and to giddy up with life, which is what your book is going to be called, right, when it comes out?
It's really funny. If you look at my name, it says "Make Possible Happen," and we'll have that discussion whether what the book will be called when it comes out, and it's like 95% written. But there's truth that things like the word possible and things like making it happen and gears and shifting and taking control are far more a part of my movement forward life than giddy up. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
I like that, by the way. I like the direction it's going.
The original title of Fuck Mediocrity is still up for consideration.
I love that title.
I'm sure if anything, it's just going to be a chapter in the book, but we'll see.
And you had that chapter before those books came out with all those same.
I think it was probably you or somebody else. I don't know how many 4 years ago that when I told you I was writing a book called Fuck Mediocrity, we're on the opposite side of it. And this was before Mark Manson. I would have been the first one at Amazon, and now I'll be like the 8th.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe I have to push the envelope in another direction.
Maybe. So. What I want to do, though, is for a moment slice through all the making better. And I want to go back to that time where this kid who wanted to be loved, who in that moment had thought it was the worst day of his life. When did you start to act out and do the things that ended you? What did you do that ended you up in prison? And how did you get to that place? Because you went from this kid riding in the back of a BMW 2002, right, to something happening and activating something that.
Sure.
And I want to hear that story, if you don't mind.
I was somewhere around my 12th or 13th birthday. Somewhere around that summer, I remember having my first drink, and I remember now prior to let's go backwards a second. Like prior to that day, it was me and my mom, and she had a boyfriend that she lived with for 10 years who had kids from a different marriage who I really saw once in a while. They would come to town, but like there was a clear distinction between dad and I didn't have a dad. He wasn't around. He had escaped. I have him now in my life. I didn't then. And so there was always some lack of belonging and desire to fit in. Complete lack of feeling like I had a sense of belonging and a desire to want to fit in. And I'm not good enough. I'm not good looking enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not anything enough was part of the all of those times. I had a chip on my shoulder. Look back at my report cards, which my mom has been happy to hand me over, and they're awesome. They're satisfactory plus. Kris has a real chip on his shoulder. He's got so much more potential. He could be doing so much better if he just applied himself. They were suck times. I have a 12 and 15-year-old or a 13 and 15-year-old right now, and just looking at their lives, I think, I hated that part of my life.
Yeah.
I hate, high school especially, and that's where fitting in and doing whatever, and whatever I thought anyone else wanted me to be or do, I did. And then alcohol and getting high especially creeped into my life early on, and I don't know if it took complete control right away, but it was an escape, the escape that I looked for and never found anything that gave me that same kind of escaping feeling.
Yeah. But so in a situation where you're feeling not connected in mosaic terms, there's a lack of connection. You feel disconnected from things. You feel alone. You feel separated. You feel not good enough. Why not turn to something like that, right? All of a sudden you have something that takes that feeling away. And so how does it go from, like, there's probably a lot of people listening that at 13 years old had their first drink or smoked their first cigarette or did, in my day, marijuana or whatever it was, but didn't end up in a prison cell. So walk me through that transition from having that drink, having that smoke, whatever it was, to where you.
So it was two stages. One, my senior year of high school, I skipped like the first 60 days of school. I figured out I could write a note and say I was going to see the doctor, psychiatrist, and no one calls a psychiatrist because the psychiatrist is not going to confirm or deny whether you were there or not. So I figured out I could bail with just this handwritten note, and I mastered my mom's signature. But like, I don't know, 2 months into the school year, they're like, dude, you've missed like 45 days. And therapy is clearly not going that well for you.
Wow.
And
did they call your mom at that point?
Yeah, they did. They called my mom they had the notes all spread out, and I didn't know what to do. And I'm like, I get high every day. Every day. I get high. I get high before I come to school, at school, after school, during school.
And how were you getting high? Were you drinking? Were you smoking?
I get high. Yeah, so I would drink a little bit, but I wasn't a big fan of drinking. I didn't like the taste of it. I liked what I liked what tequila did for me, but I liked to smoke pot and get high, and that was my clear drug of choice back then. And although I've got 30 years of sobriety now through the rooms of AA, my true drug of choice was always marijuana. But alcohol was always involved in some way, shape, or form. Right? Got to wash it down with something. Got to freshen your breath with something. And it was my senior year. I went to treatment and I got sober for 2.5 years.
Wow.
I went off to Eden Prairie, Minnesota, stayed there for 30 or 60 days. I don't know, came back, went to a sober homeroom, went to meetings with kids on a regular basis, and still didn't feel like I belonged, but I tried to fit in. And like 2.5 years later, complete dry drunk, dropped out of college at that point in time, living with a friend, not having much of a job, just stumbling through life. I mean, I was probably 19 years old at the time. Started hanging out with a bunch of guys who were fun to hang out with and liked to get high and liked to drink and liked to break into cars and break into houses under construction, and just, it was a awesome, fun summer, I thought, that ended with 2 felony convictions and 5 years I got a felony conviction. I got 5 years of probation as a result of that. I continued to rob and steal, and got arrested again for another felony. And the first offer while sitting in jail, not knowing when I was going to come out, was for 10.5 to 15 years if I just pled guilty. And I mean, they had me I was not going to beat this charge, the second one. And I was 20 years old at the time, and looking at, okay, maybe by the time I'm 30 or 35, they're going to let me out of this building. And, that's probably going to suck.
Yeah.
And I was in Rochester, New York, so Attica was probably in the future.
Yeah. So let's pause for a minute.
Sure.
Okay. Because the neat thing about a movie that we call our life is, in looking back, we can pause and we can sort of say, wow, at that point, could you ever imagine that where you are now would be where you are?
Yeah.
So,
I didn't have any family. I didn't have any, my friends didn't want to show up anywhere. And, I needed them to come and put $20 in my commissary account so I could buy cigarettes. Right. And none of them would come near the building because they're just as arrestable as I was.
Right.
if they weren't already in a Florida jail somewhere for some other stupid crime. No, I mean, my parents wouldn't take the phone calls. They were good advocates of tough love. Told me I was calling at the wrong time, the wrong place. Um, yeah, it was. I didn't have a future.
So here's really why I love you, because I've never really known your whole story. I've known most of it, but what I love about you right now is your candor, your openness, your vulnerability, because what the whole purpose of this show is to say to people where we are is not where we are. It's just where we are right now.
I learned a lesson with this a long time ago. I had a friend over for dinner when I was about 10 years sober, married to my wife, Kimberly, and I had a friend from that past come for dinner. And we started telling stories about back then. And it was almost as if he wanted to deny it ever happened.
Wow.
And I'm like, I will never, ever, ever be that unvulnerable in my life. It happened, right? So everyone has to understand there was a true trigger for me being so comfortable with my vulnerability. And I was in a jail cell, sitting there, and a good faith minister walked up and asked me if I wanted to talk. And I'm like, I've been to church, I've been to temple equal amount of times, hate both of them. But sure, no, everyone else wants to fight. I'll be happy to have a conversation.
Right.
We talked. I don't know what we talked about, but he gave me a Bible, and I read within the book of John that particular evening, and it said, my takeaway was, say a prayer for another human being.
Wow.
So this was my prayer. Please let my grandfather live long enough so he can see me do something with my life. Period. End of story. That was my prayer. My grandfather, Pete, had just turned 80. I missed his birthday party. I felt horrible about that. I was invited. But please let my grandfather live long enough so he can see me do something with my life. The next morning on my floor showed up this guy named Danny. And funnily enough, his name is Danny.
Not me, though, right?
Not you. And
it could have been me, but it wasn't.
No. And Danny, a career criminal, been in and out for a long time. I had met him once before when I was in there for 60 days for my original conviction. And he knew the bail bondsman. And like within 48 hours, his mom on the outside had got me bailed out. And I saw the light of day and knew, get to a treatment center, go get help. And so I locked myself. I called up a treatment center and got myself enrolled in that program. They weren't going to let me in for 2 weeks. And I'm like, well, why don't I just show up on your doorstep drunk tomorrow morning and go to your detox facility? You got to let me in, right? And they're like, just show up. Don't do that. And I went there and I lied to the courts. I said, I can't, I'm in a treatment facility. They won't let me out for 30 days. And then for 60 more days, we lied to the courts again and said, I'm in this next phase. And then for 6 months, I was at a halfway house, did this, lied again, said I can't come. For 2 years, I did outpatient in their supportive living environment, living in their apartment, collecting welfare, congregate care level 2, and going back to school. Seeing a counselor on a regular basis, living with 2 other sober people, going to meetings on a regular basis, having a sponsor, getting connected with my family again, developing some new friends, and really started to make some changes until the courts were like, yo, dude, seriously, you got to come in. It's been 2.5 years. What are you gonna do with these charges? And I offered a plea of guilty. Now, the minimum for a predicate felon is 1 year. And that's why I was pretty sure they were going to give me 1 year. And then I'd get like a couple months off. And I'd probably have to go to jail for like 6 months. But I figured they're not going to give me the worst. And I almost have my associate's degree here. I'm enrolling at RIT soon. Like things are rolling pretty good. So what? I go back to jail for 6 more months. And I went in front of Judge DePasquale and I pled guilty, had my family there. And he said, I can't accept your plea of guilty. The person standing in front of me today is no longer the person who committed those crimes, I can't hold you accountable. Case dismissed.
Wow.
And
so stop the story for a minute. Tell me what's going on in your, because that was how long ago? That was 30 years ago?
27 years ago.
27 years ago. And when you talk about it, look, what's happening now that it's so
Yeah, it's, I think in 30 years, I've told that story 7,000 times. And I've not cried 4.
Wow.
So what it's about that constant reminder. I haven't told it for a little while. In the same context.
Hold on. What about that story brings those tears to your eyes? What happened? What did the judge give you in that moment that brings this amount?
I mean, a tremendous amount. I think one of the greatest things I got out of that was, I don't know, my perception of reality and his perception of reality were 2 completely different fucking things. And, you know, I'm like, I'm pleading guilty to something and ready to face my crime. And his perception was, no.
Yeah.
I'm not going to slow you down from a world of your own possibilities. Wow. Go for it.
Wow. What a beautiful, that's not common. It's almost.
I mean, neither is some punk ass kid from the suburbs going to the worst possible jail, the worst possible treatment facility, living on concrete. I mean, none of them is fucking normal.
Yeah. Yeah, but life isn't normal. And the beautiful, like what I love about the Mosaic and the book that I wrote is it's full of surprises, because when Mo goes to try and meet these people that are going to introduce him to heaven, he meets common ordinary people. And when he sits with them for a few minutes and he just listens to their story, he sees that they're not at all what they think they are. And for you, there's so many times in just the short few minutes we've been talking that already what appeared to be is not at all what is, and something just changed. And there are moments that are these miraculous moments, miracle moments, where if we just surrender, like you didn't go in as a badass and say, I didn't do it, or I'm not going to do it, or I'm not going to take responsibility, and I'm not guilty. You went in and you had already experienced this transformation. And so for a judge to be able to see that is almost like a little angel was sitting in that. When we expect the miracle, sometimes the miracle comes, right? And oftentimes it comes. So, okay, enough with. Is there a ribbon or bow that you want to tie that whole story up with that we haven't talked about? Because I want to now progress into where that went to here.
The simple prayer of let my grandfather live long enough for him to see me do something with my life. You know, if that wasn't enough, he got to see, you know, plenty of other. Got to see the beginnings of a great marriage. He didn't get to see my kids. Didn't live long enough for that, but he certainly got to see me turn my life around, and a good chunk of it. So
fabulous.
Yeah.
So before we leave to part 3 or 4 or 6, right? For people that are going through hard times, that just happen to hear this right now, that can really relate to where you've been, and maybe you're beyond where they went, or maybe that's not even close to what they're going through.
Right.
What can you say now, looking back, that from inside, not just, I don't want you to teach people, because that's not what they need. I want you to say from your own experience, from your place, what is the one thing that you'd like to say to them at this point in their life that you might have been able to hear had somebody said it to you?
The turning points, and that was one of them. The major turning points through any suffering that I've ever had have always only been when I showed up just raw, naked, and vulnerable.
Wow.
And like all the walls down. What you see is what you get. And and it's usually been because I'm just beaten down. I get, like everyone says, those have all been amazing, courageous moments. And I'm like, in the moment, they were not courageous. They were like, oh,
Yeah, devastating.
Can't fucking do it this way any longer.
Yeah.
And I've had a handful of those, and they still happen.
Yeah.
I've had one in my life quite recently where I hid something for a really long time from a lot of people who mattered, and showed up open, honest, broken, vulnerable, beaten down, and the world just showed, the world conspires in all of its beauty to make possible happen.
Yeah.
And be it's like a broken fucking record for me some days, I think.
Yeah. It's really interesting because as you're speaking, and I don't want to be too narcissistic about the mosaic and all of that, but when in one of the people that Mo meets in the story is a street artist, and he's just had an experience of meeting the wise one who's given him a real experience of the mosaic together by tapping him on the forehead and showing him the unity of all things. And then he opens up his eyes and comes back, and he's on the street with a street artist sitting in the floor with mosaic pieces all around them. And the street artist says to him, Mo, what do you see when you see these pieces? And Mo's too vulnerable from that experience and too raw to actually trust to be able to say to this man what is. He hides what he says. He said, they just look like broken pieces to me. And he says, Mo, do you really think that you were just up there with the wise one who just gave you an experience of all the pieces coming together as one? Do you think it's a coincidence the first person you meet is a mosaic maker sitting on the street, sitting with broken pieces all around them, who asks you, what do you see when you see these pieces? I'm going to ask you again, Mo, what do you see when you see these pieces? And Mo says, I see they're not broken at all. They're part of something new that's evolving, which is this mosaic that could have never happened when they were proud and whole. They had to be smaller so they could piece together to create this new artistry. And it really, when I read it, even though it was written through me, it still touches me deeply because it's in those places where we don't hold on to what was, but we allow what is to happen. What are we becoming? We're no longer that beautiful vase that sat on there. We're a chipped piece of that. But in that chipped piece, we create something far more beautiful, which is the totality of this mosaic, which is exquisite. So I want to talk with you now about the beauty of that. I would love to talk to you about how this transformed for you and how it's still the battle that you have to put up with every day, because being real and being authentic and being ourselves sometimes is a challenge. As beautiful as it is, sometimes it's a challenge. So tell me a little bit about how you went from prison cell to running one of the top gift rep businesses in the Northeast, to selling that gift rep business, to going with what you always dreamed of doing, which was just helping people. Can you take a few moments and do that for me?
Yeah, the beginning part, there was a purpose, and it was like live a life to make Grandpa happy, to make Grandpa proud, and the purpose changed, and I got done with. I was at RIT, right? So after
what is RIT for people?
So yeah, so I got my associate's degree at Monroe Community College, formerly known as Southern Henrietta Institute of Technology, SHIT, and went to Rochester Institute of Technology, the actual acronym, and for business. And I went for finance originally, and then I took this entrepreneurship class. And in this entrepreneurship class, and I got to remember this was 1990, like before, like people, like you had to look up how to spell entrepreneur.
Right.
And my teacher brought in 10 of his friends, because I think it was a 10-week class, 10-week quarters there. And every week we'd have class and then a business plan builder. And then we'd have one 90-minute session of him bringing in friends of his that worked for Kodak, Xerox, Bausch & Lomb or whatever for 20 years plus, and then left to go do their own thing.
Wow.
And I fell in love with the stories that I was hearing of all these people like breaking away from the company and doing their own thing. And I'm like, why the fuck am I getting a degree in finance and entrepreneurship? Why don't I just screw this? Like, why would I go work for someone for 20 years and then do my own thing? Why don't we just do that now? And I've never had a job. I washed windows and waxed cars to pay my way through college and turned it into a sales rep career and started a small company in the sales rep business because my family owned a retail store. My stepfather ran a small agency as well. Competed against him, sold to my mom, grew it from Rochester, New York to all of upstate New York to into New England, including New York, bought a company in New Jersey and, eventually covered all 6 New England states plus New York and New Jersey, and had a team out on the road and had great vendors, and over 20 years built this company under the purpose of making great retailers more funner. That was I know you're a good retailer. I know you're great. I don't want to work with you unless you are. And I know you're already having fun. I just want to make sure that everyone's having more funner. And I know it wasn't a word back then, but I recently saw somebody like JetBlue or something use the word funner. And I thought, kudos.
Right.
Validation. 20 years later, it's finally accepted as a people know what I mean when I say it.
So second time in 28 minutes or 37 minutes.
That I've logged owning
concept.
Something before somebody else validated it. Yes, totally. Yes. Totally. Like fucking buying stocks, though, I got nothing. I didn't trademark it. It's probably not postage mark stamped somewhere, so I can't really prove it, but I'll own it. I'm good with it.
Yeah,
I only have a few of them.
You just have to prove it to yourself, because that's
whatever. Maybe if I tell myself 17,000 more times, I'll actually prove it to myself and move on from it. If that's baggage I'm carrying, totally fine with that. It was purpose driven. It was like I wanted to have fun. We had fun running Kris and Company, and it was like I got to do my own thing, and I was bringing great fun products to market. Watching other great people do it, learning from them, and had great mentors in the industry, and was happy to have built such an amazing organization. I'm proud to say that except for, I think there were 14 sales reps at the company when I sold it, except for 1 or 2 of them, they all still work there and all still love their jobs. And when I sold it at 20 years, the majority of them had been there 12 plus. 2 of them had been there for 17 years. So there were other people having fun along the way as well.
100%, because that's where I first met you.
Yeah.
I met you as a with Hay House and having books and looking to open up a gift market. And you were a part of a core group of reps that were the high-end, good people, that they were the sought after group. And I was fortunate enough to be with a lot of those people. And when I asked, who do I go in the Northeast, your name was the first name that came up.
So we had a fun differentiator, and I don't know how many people are totally different on this about, but I do remember this. Every year or every quarter, all my vendors would send an email or a call and say, could you send us a copy of your rep list? And I'm like, you have it. And they're like, no, a current copy. And I'm like, you have it.
Right.
Nobody leaves. Same list, same addresses, same phone numbers.
Even now, like, it's even more spectacular now.
Still the same fucking list today, actually.
Yeah,
except for 2 reps, I think it's still exactly the same today, 5 years later.
So, again, let's stop the movie for a minute.
Sure.
Okay. Because of the work that I'm doing with Mosaic, I sort of see life as a mosaic and all the pieces sort of coming together. So if you could take the pieces of your life up until that point and put them together, how did you integrate those? What did you see growing up, being in a prison cell, getting out, playing the game, starting a rep business? What did you see that brought you to the place through what were the threads that remained that when you were going like this with your hand in that car, what was the thing that kept
I knew that I loved bringing cool design to retailers, and our third value was that I needed to like the product and the people that we were representing. Passion for the people and the products that we represented was the P in our values, and I lived that one from early on. And the thread was, like, I don't want to fit in. I'm going to do my own thing, and y'all can fit in.
So, what was the guy's name? What was the guy's name that was in the fair that you followed when?
Joie Chitwood.
So you were Joie Chitwood again.
Maybe. I truly at that point in time was like, I think I'm unemployable. And forget about my criminal record, but that certainly made it a little harder. Although it's interesting. I give props to Lori at Smith Barney. She gave me, when I was getting sober, she gave me an internship at Smith Barney. Despite my record. So there's always somebody willing to take a risk with you. And in as tight a world as you could possibly get as a Securities Exchange Commission, she was willing to take a risk and employ me. But then I learned if I waxed her car and I waxed her boss's car and everyone else's, I made way more money than I did as an associate there. So thus began that career. I was marching to my own beat, and I think I had done that early on as a kid, riding around on my bike, just doing my own thing, marching to my own beat, and figuring out as I went along. And that's how Kris and Company started small. It wasn't until I don't know how many years into it, Kimberly and I were getting married, and I think we did like 1.5 million that year, and which was just in sales. So that wasn't in commissions.
Yeah.
I think that probably earned me $12. I mean, we burned through $36,000 our first year and made $12,000 doing it. So, I was upside down a little bit.
Yeah. But so what I want to do is that independence and doing it your own way had a high end to it, which was living your life the way you wanted to live it and living it the way you played. It also had the low end to it, which was getting you caught into a group of people that were living life outside of the norm, and ended you in prison. But then you went into AA, right, or a 12-step or something.
Sure.
And so, how does someone who lives life their own way continue to go through AA and maintain it, because you maintain it and you sponsor people now and that from that.
So that's probably why I don't go to meetings too often these days.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've been sober for over 11,000 days, 30 years now.
Congratulations. Huge thing.
It's one day at a time. I'll continue to say that, but at the same time, for all of my long timers or anyone who reminds me that's one day at a time, I've just been fortunate enough to string a fuck ton of them together.
Yeah.
And having gone out for having gotten sober for 2.5 years and then gone out again and then come back for 30 more, I got 32.5 years of sobriety, and I'm 50 years old. Well, my drinking career was short.
Wow.
That marching to my own, that's probably why I stopped after, I say I go in 5-year cycles. 5 years on, 5 years off, 10 years on, 10 years off, 5 years on, whatever. And for the last 5 or 10 years, it hasn't been an important part of my life. Sobriety's been important, but sobriety to me today is more about continuing to learn how to live life without having to have some kind of outside influence like a drug or alcohol for the good times, the bad times, and the indifferent times. I'm pretty sure, like you and I went to Peru last year, and I seriously considered at 29 years of sobriety doing an ayahuasca treatment because everyone talked about like what an amazing journey it was. I didn't do it. I went there and I meditated and I did yoga and I did this super cool meditation process while I was there on top of Machu Picchu. And I'm pretty fucking sure I had a really, really, really awesome experience.
Yeah.
Breathing fresh air. But I can take my mind, I can take my body anywhere. And I don't like whatever the drugs are. I think I can make them all on my own.
Yeah.
And get to wherever, feel whatever pain I want to feel whatever pleasure I want to feel, get to whatever spot I want to get to. And I've dedicated my life to like figuring that out.
Yeah.
How do I, and it's tough because society is not designed for a sober guy or gal.
No,
like
totally not.
We drink at everything.
Yeah.
I have people who come to me like, I'm thinking about stopping drinking. I'm like, why?
Right. No, totally.
I'll support you. I'll be here for you. I'm going to tell you this. If you're not ready and you go to an AA meeting, AA will fuck your drinking up.
Yeah.
You got to be ready. You got to be willing.
So we have about 15 minutes left, a little less than that. Okay. And nothing of it is a tangent because it's all the pieces that make you where you are. So if you were now to look back, pause the film for a minute and just look back and see all the segments that you did, from the kid who lost his family and thought it was the worst day of his life, to the person who did Tony Robbins, who realized it was an opportunity to see different perspective and see the whole thing differently, to the kid who got caught up with a group of people that were just fun and wrote better than his mom his note to stay out of school and was smoking and drinking, but smoking and drinking, to knowing that those drugs in your system affected you in a way that were more than what you wanted, that you sort of lost some control in that. Perhaps I'm putting words in your mouth, but I'm assuming that's true. To ending up in prison, to meeting a judge who said the person I'm looking at is no longer the person that came into prison. Just like Mo, the person he met or Saul initially was not the person he left when he listened to them. Piece together all of those pieces and talk to me now about K2, which is the work that you're doing now, which when we re-met again was the book that you were writing about taking the 12 steps and putting them into a business format, and whether that's what you're doing now. What are you doing now, and how is the work that you're doing just really a mosaic now of what you've been through and what a company goes through and what a business goes through? You see where I'm going with the question?
Yep. There's always been some kind of purpose. There's always been some kind of rules, and there's always been some clarity on where I want to go in the things that have been we'll call them monumental changes in my life, or the successes that we started this conversation with, which are on my stupid bio, which really needs to be rewritten. 8-time Ironman. I was 242 pounds once upon a time. Couldn't run half a mile. I didn't, I was unemployable, and I built a business to 8 figures. My entire family's been divorced, God knows how many times. And I've got a 20-year successful marriage and 2 awesome teenage kids. So on the flip side of what shouldn't be possible, what's possible is. And it's always come from the underlying thread for all of them have been clarity on why I'm doing it. I'm a big believer in Simon Sinek's work, and which came halfway through the journey. Big believer in having a set of rules in place, values, whatever you want to call them. I call them the rules I live by. But as well, each journey has had clarity on what a destination looks like, what the finish line looks like. Unfortunately, the finish line keeps moving.
Yeah.
Right. So, it was for once upon a time, it was Ironman. It wasn't 8.
Right. Why is it unfortunate? I'm sorry. Excuse me. I don't want to lose that. Why is it unfortunate that the finish line keeps moving?
It's not. Maybe it's not. It's unfortunate in regards to, and I don't know, I think the times when I think the finish line stopped and I crossed it is when complacency kicks in, is
Yeah.
when contempt and I don't like. I crossed that line a couple of years ago and I think fell into a little bit of a funk where I crossed the finish line and didn't have another one out in front of me, and got caught up in my head with, but it is enough. Telling myself that a new finish line was just because there wasn't enough, or I wasn't good enough, or what you had done wasn't enough, and I don't really think that's what it's about. I think I'm here to keep having more finish lines.
Yeah.
And always another one out, and always another one out, and always another. And it's not that it's never good enough. It's that I just want to make every day a little bit better. My entire 30 years of sobriety have been about not drinking, and waking up and not having a drink is the easiest fucking part of my life. It's not knock on whatever the hell this is. I've never wanted to, nor do I think it's even in remote possibility. And I've pushed it. I've tested it. I've gone to some deep, dark places in the last 30 years. But I think every day has been about how do we make it better?
Yeah.
Not better from it's not good, but it's fucking awesome. How do I make it better?
Yeah.
It's beyond possible. How do I make it better?
Yeah.
It's spectacular. It's outstanding, as Tony would say. Cool. How do we make it better?
Yeah. And so I wouldn't have asked that of most people, but because I know you and because I know you are someone who pushes the boundaries, not only in your own life, but in the people and the companies that you work with, that's why I asked it, because the finish line is always changing for you. And to me, it's
a new methodology with our business coaching practice that we do this thing called looking out 3 years. It used to be a 3-year vivid vision as taught by Cameron Harold, when you literally picked a date 3 years in the future and worked toward that date. Now I torment my clients because every 90 days we move it out another 90 days. And I'm like, no, you're never going to get there. But that's about as far out as you can actually look and be proactive about. Right? I have a 25-year plan for my own life, but it's in 3-year segments.
Wow.
And
so something that I learned in the Mosaic is, our destination determines the route we take to get there. Right?
It's kind of like Google. It's kind of like Apple.
Yeah.
I always, people are always like, why do I have to pick a destination? I'm like, well, because if you want to go somewhere, you pick up your phone, your GPS, and you tell it, I want to go to Danny's house in California. And and then it asks you, do you want to walk? Do you want to ride your bike? Do you want to drive a car? Do you want to take a bus? Do you want to fly? What strategy do you want to use to get there?
Yeah.
And you also have to have fundamental clarity, I think, on where you are today.
Perfect. So in summing up,
usually what people don't have.
Yeah, people don't.
Everyone wants to know, I want to make $1 million, but where are you today?
Well, I would broaden that a little from my perspective, and I think from yours, is that most people have no idea who they are or where they are. And most people don't have any idea where they want to go. So without knowing who you are or where you are and not knowing where you want to go, every road you take will get you there. Because you're right, but it's the beauty.
I call it this theory.
Yeah, the beauty of working with somebody like Kris is that he's going to help you to identify where you are and to have bite-sized goals that you can see whether you're progressing towards those or not, and that you have a destination and you chart your course just like a GPS. It charts your course right there. Occasionally it was, in the early years, it was rerouting a lot, but now it's pretty good, right? And so in the final minutes, I close always by asking the same questions to people. From your experience, if there would be one thing that you could tell the world without anger, to a world that would listen without judgment, what would be the one thing? It's just one thing you want to say. What would you say?
Somebody somewhere out there call it, her, him, whatever you want, has more in store for us than we could possibly imagine. It's just our job to go do it and get out of our own way.
Beautiful. Love it. And then the final question has a question and then a sub-question. Okay?
Sure.
And that is, when you look at the world that we're living in today, is this the world that you always dreamed you would hand over to your kids and to your grandkids?
Like the whole world?
Yeah, like when you look at the situations that exist, is this what you always dreamed that you would give to your kids?
Yeah, I think that the gift I give my kids is the ability to see the world around them through a number of different perspectives. The world, I don't think today is any better off or any worse off than it has ever been in the history of time. And, matter of personal opinion, I think we're better off today than we were. We used to tar and feather people for crying out fucking loud, right? Yeah. We used to stone people for growing 2 crops on the same. Like, seriously, life sucked a long time ago. I think though, like there's a world of possibilities, and there's a world of abundance, and there's a monster world of 9 billion different perceptions, and having the ability to. My gift to my children is the ability to see the world through lots of different eyes. And, we do it through different experiences, through different travel, through different sharing. And it's not just from, 55 Brentwood Drive in Glastonbury, Connecticut, white middle-class America.
Yeah. Well, you now see the reason why I love this man.
Now everyone knows where I live.
That's right. You now see the reason why I love this man, because I've asked thousands of people that question. Kris is the first one that answered yes. Everybody's answered no. And I love it because it fits in with your whole belief system, which is a world of possibilities, which is to see things that others don't see, to see the world that you want to see and create that world, and to make that world the world you want, and not to be limited by what you see around you, but to create that world for yourself. So if people wanted to get in touch with you, which if they don't, they're crazy. If they wanted to get in touch with you and have you either coach them or coach their business or help them in some way, what would be the best way for them to do that?
The best way is through my email, through Kris@kriskaplan.com, all names with a K. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm pretty sure my cell number's on the front page of my website.
And what is your website, just so we know?
It's just KrisKaplan.com, Kriskaplan.com. I think it says it on there. Like, if you're an introvert, send me an email. If you're an extrovert, just text me.
And when we post this, we will list all that information. We'll put your email, we'll put your Kris, I want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for showing up the way you show up in the world. Thank you for showing up on this show. Thank you for giving people a slice into the life that has been sometimes tumultuous, sometimes beautiful, sometimes very, very raw and real. And thank you for being the man that you are in the world that we live in today. And thank you for being my friend. It's an honor to have you.
Hey, the world needs to know something else, however, which is we worked together in the past when you were at Hay House and all that. I came to you a couple of years ago because I wanted to write a book. And I thought I'd hire Danny as my book coach because I wanted to write a self-help book and have Hay House publish it. And you talked me out of that. But you've become so much more. And people ask me what Danny is in my life today. And fundamentally, Danny has been, you're the one who centers me and gets me grounded. And I thank you deeply from the bottom of my heart for that, because in the moments when I've been anything but centered and grounded in a very short period of time, sometimes 2 minutes, sometimes 15, sometimes a full hour it takes, you get me there and put me back on the path that I'm supposed to be on and belong on. And I honor you for that. You've got an incredible ability to center this crazy freak. Thank you.
Well, I'm in awe. Thank you. I appreciate that. I can't tell you how much our friendship means to me, and thank you. I encourage everyone who's listening to go to the links below to have a conversation with Kris, to see what can happen, to see how you can make the impossible possible. Thank you again, Kris. Big love to you. And for all those listening, tune in next time. Ciao.
Cheers.